Like I said,
I know I did feel so bad last time.
no. Well, and I knew you, for what you were doing, I'm like, yeah, you're supposed to give me numbers from last time.
Oh. Okay.
So.
The last one had 285.
Two, what?
285.
285. Oh, that was live?
That was live.
Smack cannot connect to iCloud because of problem with your email. Open iCloud, fix preferences later.
Yeah.
I could say, I'm pretty sure I saw that last time. Okay, so that was live. What is, you said YouTube?
38 on YouTube.
Oh, that's bad.
I know the YouTube one was probably been good since the first one, but I sent this one out with email today and the last one,
Okay.
so we'll probably go up.
I think it looks like we have 3 live people already. Huh?
4.
Oh, 4. Mine says 6. So can you already see and hear this? Because I'm wondering if we should be finding a way to like put up something else, like a countdown.
I can't see it.
Huh?
I can't see it.
Okay. It's a little Slayer doing like stupid. But I can denote we will start promptly at noon. And so we have about 7 more minutes for people to join us on live. And we will be talking today about indoor plants and holiday evergreens. I don't know. I'll use the proper term for now. Oh, that's right. I need to figure out how to see the chat. Okay. So I will also denote, if you're already joining us live, that if you do have questions, you can go ahead and start sharing them, and I will address them as appropriate. I'm hearing other talking, but I'm assuming that's on the other side of those doors. Got it. Oh, that's right. Turn the sound off. That's why I grabbed the phone in the first place, was to shut off the ringer. Oh. It's because I was leaning. Getting corrections to sit up. I should be sitting up straight with my shoulders back and about 5 more minutes and then we'll go ahead and actually get started for the day. I turned it so you couldn't see the logo. I did think about that. I don't think you saw me do that, but yes, I turned it. It's right. I turned it so it was like right there. What, like a 5-second delay? I guess actually I'm gonna send. Wait, no, I'm not. Mm-hmm. Right there with you. It's one or the other. It's, yeah, starting to warm up, or I've gotten used to it. The table's still cold. The table's still cold. My hands are resting on it right now. I can't hit the right letters because my hands are cold. But I heard even though the weather's right now in the 40s, the normal average would be the 20s. Yeah, Monday. Yeah. I think the proper term for that, some of that precip, is grapple. Grapple. Like the snowballs, I think, because I like to watch WGN News, and I think I've heard him talk about it. And whenever you hear or have those snowballs, I call them the snowballs. They're like little round, either ice pellets, but they're white. I think that's called grapple. Yes, you do. That's why we're here. But yeah, I think it's called grapple or something like that. And yeah, I'm glad we didn't get, in a sense, just for driving's sake, I'm glad it didn't get as bad as what we could have, but I'm also kind of sad we didn't, because I was looking forward to maybe some more snow. But I also appreciated that my husband didn't have to go plowing, and because we have a young kitten and we've been trying to let her loose at night in the house rather than penning her up, but then she starts to cry at our door and insists that she sleeps with us. And then that day, my husband got up to check. When he came back, she sat there crying at the door, and what I didn't even realize is he got up and locked her up, and I was sleeping because I didn't realize he got back up to lock her up. So I fell asleep during it, but I felt bad for him that he had to go lock her up because he couldn't fall back asleep. As long as she doesn't hear an alarm clock, she'll leave us alone. But since she hears that alarm clock, all right. Well, I am looking at the time, and instead of talking about my kitten at home, we will go ahead and get started with today's presentation, since at least the clock I'm looking at says noon right now. So welcome to this live series that we've kind of been doing here at Gabis Arboretum, I'm with Porter County Extension. My name is Nikky Witkowski. I work again for the Porter County Extension office, and I am called their Agricultural and Natural Resources Extension Educator. Basically, I like to help people out with their plant problems, insect problems, or disease problems, usually with plants. But we're here today to discuss some tips and tricks for indoor plants, as well as your holiday evergreens, things to consider, especially for those of you who have went and maybe gotten some Christmas trees or thinking of getting Christmas trees to bring in the house. So at any time during this presentation, feel free to put questions into the comment bar on this live stream. If it doesn't go there and goes somewhere else, I do have Peyton who will send me your comments otherwise, so if it doesn't get answered right away, that's probably why. But we will get to your questions at an appropriate timing as we can. So like I said, first thing we're going to start off with today is a little bit about indoor plants. So I have actually an example here that I want to show you of one thing I talk about with indoor plants is that when you're watering them, you always want to make sure you water so that the water goes all the way through the pot. With that means also that you have to have sometimes a pot setup. So, oops, I guess you can't see that low. But in front of me, I do have a plant here that is an example, and we see a nice decorative pot on the outside. And if I were to tip it up, you notice there are no holes in the bottom of this pot. Well, it is actually not a good situation to have it all. And instead, what happened is they went ahead and they did a pot and pot theory. I apologize while I'm trying to get this pot out. It's very tight in here. But they basically have a pot and a pot. Ooh, and there's a good example of what you should see, is that we want to see that water leave the aloe plant and go into the other pot. Now, this one, it looks like it actually probably is still sitting in the water. And that can happen too, because the pot and pot theory, lets this inner pot here that you see, the black one, it's probably going all the way to the bottom of this outer pot. What you can do to remedy that is, I thought it was funny one year that I had some rather large plants, and for sake of not wanting to make you all dizzy and car sick that may be watching, they do have another great example here of a very large tree that is also a pot in pot example. But I actually talked to somebody that did canning and said, hey, if I'm correct, you're not supposed to necessarily leave those canning rings on all the time. And usually a canning ring is reusable. And so you wind up with a lot of the canning rings. I said, can I have some? And what I did then is that, like, for example, in this situation, I would have this decorative pot down. Then I would insert the canning ring, or just have something, as a spacer. I just have like a little plastic thing here. You would insert this into the decorative pot, then put your pot on top of it. That's going to give it enough of a gap. This is only even about like half an inch, but it's going to give it enough of a gap that you won't see your plant sitting in the water as much. Now this does two things for you. So again, I'm going to drop it back in. Again, it allows you to water through the entire pot, so that way the entire root ball is getting wet. Now, we chose this indoor plant topic now for another reason though. We chose it because in the wintertime, what are we running? But our heaters. And when you have a heater running, what you also have to realize is that heater is taking out the humidity in the air. And when you think about the summer, we always complain about the humidity. And all we want to do is take humidity out. But we only take it out to a certain point. But in the wintertime, what we don't think of is the fact that then we start complaining about dry air. A great way to know if you have dry air in your house can also be if you have static in your clothing. I get mad at my house in the wintertime when my clothes start sticking to me in the wintertime, and it's partially attributed to that dry air. Well, that dry air is not good for your plants. They need that humidity in the air to actually do well. Well, going back to this pot and pot theory, that is where the water's sitting in this decorative pot in the bottom. So not so that, your plant is sitting in water, because that will rot the roots. But if you have actually some water in this pot, or another example could just be like a small dish or saucer and have a gap. If you have that water down there, it will actually evaporate around your plant. So it'll evaporate around this plant and actually create a zone of humidity right around your plant. So then it actually helps your plant out in a nice way. And because it is hidden in the pot, you never see it. Another clever trick would be to get something like a clear pie dish or some other sort of a dish, and you can get the decorative rocks. And by getting decorative rocks, you basically would take the pie dish, put the decorative rocks in it, and fill it level, then set your pot on top of it. Now this could be a decorative pot and pot, or it could be a just pot, of your normal, the black nasty one that you saw in here that's not very fancy at all. But you set that for your plant on top of that rock bed, and you fill the rock bed full of water. And then again, over time, it'll evaporate up, and it's going to help the climate for your lovely plants. The other thing to think about is the fact that, plants love friends. And that again is another way to help that, if we had one solitary plant, okay, that's fine. We need to make accommodations for just this plant. But if your plant has friends, that's where we talk about it's good to group them together, because this plant is basically like breathing out the water into the air. So it is changing the microclimate right around this plant by breathing out water, because actually it's getting stolen from the plant because there's enough moisture in the leaves that the outside air is actually taking that water out of the plant fast. So it's creating its own microclimate. Well, if this one has to create a microclimate and its friend is next to it is creating a microclimate somewhere else farther away, then they're wasting some energy. Whereas if we put our friendly plants next to each other, they help each other out. So it is a good idea, again, to kind of group your indoor plants so that you can watch out for that. Something else to think about is you notice this plant's also a little bit limp. We've been having some discussions before, and some of you may have heard if you were logged on early, some of our discussions. But you notice it looks kind of limp, and we think it's kind of sad. Well, if you are gone on a vacation over the wintertime, what do you commonly do but maybe turn down your thermostat? Well, this plant has been here at the Railway Garden area, and most people aren't visiting right now, so they turn down the thermostats. And a discussion that ensued is the fact that we realized, well, how low you turn down your thermostat could affect your plants. This aloe, for example, especially is a tropical plant. When you look at tropical plants and think about the lifestyles that they have and the habits that they like to have, when you research it, they like it to be hot and warm. That's something to watch out for. But what is that temp marking? Most houseplants need it to be at least 55 degrees in order for them to be happy. So if you're saying, well, I'm going to be gone for a couple of weeks, so I don't care, I'm going to turn my house down to 50 degrees, warm enough so that my pipes don't freeze, but cool enough so that I'm not wasting a ton of heating. Well, what did you just do to your plant? You just put it in an environment that is not conducive to its growth. It's used to it being nice and warm, maybe 70s and 80s. But as soon as you get it down into the 50s, if it usually bottoms out at 55, your plant's not going to be happy. So that can cause some of the additional wilting and other problems to happen. And so that's why you really need to be considerate of your houseplants when you're going away on vacation. So again, like I said, if you're going away on vacation, make sure we don't turn our thermostats down too far. And again, they need that higher humidity. So if you even had pets, for example, and have a pet sitter, you may have that sitter say, hey, if I'm going to be gone for like 5 days, hey, I'm going to make sure that my tray of water for my plants is going to be topped off right now. But can you check it midway through the week and see if you need to top it off with a little bit more water? Old school things would be to say to set it on a radiator also to help get water into the air. So you'd put like a glass or metal dish on top of those old radiator heaters. I don't know that many of us have those anymore, but that's something that you can consider and do as well. More of our modern systems for heating and cooling, things to think about on that is, checking. It is called a humidistat, and is your humidistat working to check the humidity in the air or not, so that it knows when to be on and when to be off. You may have also turned it down because, again, during the summer, you may have had it down at a lower rating because you had enough humidity outside that you didn't need to have the humidity as high as you might have to have it set in the wintertime. So that's something else to check, is that if you have a humidistat in your house, something to avoid. Interestingly enough, this aloe actually had its plant tag with it. And what I have to laugh is that even if you read the back, it says maintenance, avoid cold drafts. So that tells you right there, this does not like cold. And you may not think about it, but you're like, well, I want to give you the most sunlight. And so what do we do if we wanted to give it the most sunlight? We put it smack up against the window. All right, but if I am smack against the window, our windows are, I'm going to say at least quasi-energy efficient, but are they going to stop all the cold air from coming in? No. So actually by smacking that plant right against the window to give it the maximum sunlight, that goes back to another one of those problems that then we're not avoiding the cold draft. And so we're still not doing the best that we could for our plant. So you will definitely want to have something like, 6 inches, maybe a foot. You can probably feel on the window about how far away it takes to be so that you aren't feeling a chill from the window. But we definitely don't want our plant smack against the window, because if you were to touch that window, guaranteed it's going to be cold. And then that's just like giving your plant a cold touch all the time, and then it's not going to survive and do well. So you need to make sure that, again, you pull them away from the window, They do need that light because obviously we have reduced light in the wintertime, but you need to pull them away from the window enough that they're not getting that cold draft. So kind of just to, a full loop again, all that we've talked about so far for your indoor houseplants on how to keep them the happiest and healthiest to start this winter off right. So first off, we need to make sure that our pot has a drain hole, at least one, if not multiple, so that we can water it all the way through so that water will come out the base. Some of you saw that dripping water I had earlier. Very good. We need it to drain. Two, we need it to drain, so you need to have either a decorative pot to catch the water in or something else. I've gotten some nice laundry basket tubs that are solid that work great too. So we need a solid container somewhere outside of it to catch the water that drains out. We can leave that water as long as our plant's soil is not sitting in water. We can then leave that water so that it actually creates humidity then for our plants during the drier winter months. When considering the placement of the plants, we may have to consider more south-facing windows just to maximize our light. You can still try the east or west. North is never your best window. But we need to make sure we're maximizing the sunlight or providing supplemental sunlighting. But this also, again, does not mean to put the plant against the window. You need space so that way, again, you don't have this cold air on the window touching your sensitive plant. And also remember, if you're going away and intending to turn down your thermostat, you need to be aware, again, that most indoor plants will not like the temperature below 55 degrees. Some can go lower to 50 degrees, but most of them are not going to like being below that point. What I will also bring up on your indoor plants is keep in mind, this is a downtime and kind of a dormant time for everybody. So watch how you water your plants. I have to tease and laugh that I have 2 fig trees at my house, or the Benjamin fig, the fake fig trees. I have 2 of them at my house. And I kind of question if I even water them once a month sometimes. Because the key is that they're just kind of hanging out during the wintertime. And as long as the humidity is good in my house, they're just hanging out. They're not necessarily actively trying to grow and do anything. They're just still kind of in their own sense of a dormancy. So don't think you have to water them as often as what you do, or you will actually overwater them and kill them. So watch how you water them. Make sure that the soil is actually getting a little bit dry in between your waterings so that way you can benefit your plant and not drown your plant during the wintertime. I mentioned my Benjamin figs too. It's a very common thing that if we were to see leaves browning or leaves falling off, what's the first reaction people have sometimes? Oh, it needs water. I need to water it or it's going to die. Guess what? Especially prone to those fig trees that I'm talking about, the nice green leafy trees that you might see even growing in soil, not even just in pots, in soils in some places. They have a funny habit that they don't like change. And I say that whenever a change happens, they like to spaz out on you really good. And I always hate it when the seasons change, especially when we're going from summer to fall to winter on my fig trees, because they seem like they drop over half their leaves. And I get all this leafy mess everywhere. It's kind of like how we talked, the last time we were together in October, we talked about the white pines that shed their needles because of the winter coming up. Guess what? Your indoor plants can do that too. So if you stress your plant, and it could be just the light changing or something else, by stressing your plant, you may make the leaves drop. So whenever you see, there's browning leaves or browning parts, always first say, what's been happening? Check the watering quality of it. Is it that, maybe the soil is still moist? Maybe we have to realize, there was a light change, or, there was a temperature change. There could be something else going on, and so your first reaction should not be to run for the water. So make sure you're watching out for that and not just jumping for, I need to water my plant. because that could be the worst action you take and be the death sentence then for your plant, would be to water your plant. So make sure you're being very careful about that and not just watering because you think you need to water. Thinking about that as well. When we're talking about watering, I forget this because I have my own well because I live out in a rural area. If you are anywhere in a city, remember that when you have city water, they clean the water with like chlorine or fluoride, or they clean the water with chlorine and maybe add fluoride. Those are micronutrients that the plants need, but the quantity that they are in from or in the water that you may be giving them is not a micronutrient quality. It could be that that is actually too much and toxic for the plants. The easiest way to see that is that if you have tipping of brown starting on some of your leaves, that can be a sign that if the humidity is fine, because humidity can cause brown tipping too, if the humidity is fine, you're getting that toxicity. Again, this is one reason why to water and water it through, so that way you know you are, flushing stuff out of the pot. But this is also the reason why in my office, if you were to ever visit my office, right now it's really hard in all these times, but if you were to visit my office, I have 2 large dracaenas, or a common name for them can be a corn plant, but not, the corn growing out in the fields. It's just the house plant called a corn plant. Otherwise, again, most people call them dracaenas. What I do is the fact that I will check my plants and I'm like, do I need to water? Yes. Okay. And I pour my water from a gallon jug. Guess what I do? As soon as I'm done watering, I take that jug to the faucet, I fill it full, and I set it back down. Do I need to water again? No. I'm probably not going to need to water again for a week. Maybe more, maybe less. It depends on how dry they get due to the dry air and humidity. But the point being, it takes about 24 hours, but if you don't cap the water, so I have a gallon jug without a cap on it, if you don't cap the water or like seal it off, that water will evaporate some of that chlorine and fluoride so that then it's not as toxic for your plants. So that's how you make sure that you're doing the best that you can for your indoor plants, especially if you're, like I said, on city water. We don't need to go buy the special bottled water. You don't need to buy that. You don't need to go there. But like I said, just let the water sit out for 24 hours. Or like I said, have a designated watering can, or like I said, for me, it was an empty milk jug, worked just fine. And again, let the water be in that for at least 24 hours before you water, and that should actually help you to overcome the majority of that problem. So I've spent a lot of time on indoor plants. We also said that we were going to talk about holiday evergreens and some tips and tricks for those. So one thing I will make sure to point out is the fact that holiday evergreens can include a lot of different things. It can include like pine branches, but it can also include certain things like boxwoods, or even some other ivies and things like that are evergreen at this time of the year. Holly plants is the other one I was thinking of. I was thinking of the Latin name Ilex, and I couldn't come up with holly is not Ilex. So that's what they can be made of. Now, one thing I would suggest, this hasn't been a problem as of late, but one thing to watch out is that when you do buy those, especially, I'm going to point out, if they have boxwood branches in them, there was an instance that we have a nasty disease that's called boxwood blight. There was an instance, even in Indiana one year, that unfortunately the boxwood branches that were put in that evergreen display, because they were not locally grown, the boxwood branches had the boxwood blight, and then they had to go recall or take back all those wreaths. So if you do have that, you may check specifically if it's got boxwood. There's little round leaves on a stick. That's it, like smaller than a dime is usually the size of those leaves. Check the boxwood branches and make sure that they look fine, or just simply ask, were these shipped in or were they made it locally? I've been to several nurseries or other retailers lately of garden and feed centers, or like I said, some nursery operations, and you will actually hear them talk about how they make and custom make these evergreens for your house, either in a wreath, or sometimes I think they're called like a pillow blanket or other things. They're going to talk about how they custom make them on the site. most of them are going to probably get, or be watching for things of that respect of what you need to be careful of, for the diseases, or they're locally maybe sourcing some of those stems and stuff like that. So you don't have to worry about it. But just do watch out otherwise if that could happen. Now, how to keep them nice. Ideally, some of them may be stuck in what's called a Sahara foam. It's a green, foamy type of material. It kind of more resembles almost a styrofoam. But if it's in that, it may be good to put water on that occasionally, because after all, it's an evergreen. It's technically still living, even though it's not connected to the root system anymore. So if it does have a Sahara foam block, or that foam green block, or whatever color, not that you need to, again, drown that block, because it's just like we're going back to our potted plant. We don't want to drown that block, but it's not a bad idea to occasionally pour water over it, or if it is, somehow set in it, let it set so that it can absorb water. But it's not a bad idea to, again, pour some water over that, because the cut stems may uptake some of that water to basically keep themselves fresher for longer. Now, moving on to if your holiday tradition is to get a cut Christmas tree, there are definitely some tips and tricks to that as well. So if you just are going and getting a pre-cut tree from somewhere, yes, it's pre-cut, and it's already, I'm going to call it pre-cleaned, which I'll explain in a minute. But as soon as you get it home, because of certain things that could have been done to it, and because it's already pre-cut, a recommendation is to at least trim off an inch or two, if not 3 or 4, from that stem. Think about it. That tree's been cut for a while. They seal up. The plant tries to seal up whenever it has an injury. Being cut down is like a big injury. So you may want to trim the bottom of that stump still before you put it in your holder to keep it up the tree stand. You may want to cut off, again, still the bottom inch or so. Again, just like with if you have an indoor house plant, if you do not have city water, just put regular tap water in there. That's fine. If you want to put some sort of plant food water in there, or an old standby used to here is, put some sort of a sugary beverage like Sprite or something like that in there, or, 7-Up. Yeah, you can do that, or you can get those, but otherwise, usually just by making sure you keep water in there is good enough. Keep in mind, check it daily, if not a couple times a day, and I'm going to say for the first week. Because if it's been out in the cold, it's probably like, I'm cold. I'm not doing anything. And it's just going to sit there. It's going to be dormant. But you're bringing it in to a warm house. What does warmth indicate on any plant? Let's grow. Let's get crazy. So as soon as that plant, cut tree, wakes up a little bit because it's warm, it may drain that water like that. If you don't keep up with it, again, it could seal off. So make sure you are daily, if not, every, think about every meal time for you, or at least every morning and every night, checking that water for the first week to kind of watch out for when it wakes up and starts to drink that water. If you have pets, it may not be a great idea for your pets to drink that water, depending if you have a metal tree stand or not. But if you have pets as well, keep in mind, they might be helping that water to disappear as well. So again, a good idea to check it regularly to make sure it has enough water, because as soon as it dries up, you're either going to have to retrim it, or depending on how long it's been dry, your tree's going to die pretty fast in your house, and maybe prior to your holiday gatherings that you have, depending how long you leave your tree up. I know mine will vary by that respect of, if I can tell it's getting crispy, we're going to take it out sooner than later. So again, do those tricks to make sure you are keeping, whatever evergreens, as long as you can, healthy. Now, if you go to a U-cut farm and you're going to cut it yourself, make sure you give, just like how I talked about on the pre-cuts, make sure you give yourself some extra distance. Now, I'm not going to say like a foot, but give yourself an extra 3 or 4 inches, because what's going to happen is, first, you're still going to cut and have an injury. It's probably still going to take you at least an hour, when you consider hauling the tree back, getting it paid for, getting it on your vehicle, getting home, getting it into your house, getting it on the tree stand, and getting water to it. I am sure if somebody did it in less than an hour, go you, because that seems like a tremendous feat to me, because I know it definitely does not go that fast in my household, and my tree cut place that I sometimes go is not that far away. So it is definitely an adventure. So you're going to need to accommodate for that final cut. But what's also going to happen at most places, but not all, they have, I'm going to say for lack of better terms, a tree shaker. And some of you may say, well, do I want to get it shaken or not? Well, when you consider that there could be a bird nest in there, or that it could have loose needles that would just drop extra in your house, if they will shake it free of charge, it definitely can be a great investment to have it shaken so that you have less initial needle drop and that you lose anything in there that you don't want, including maybe some critters and insects, who knows. So it's good to shake it. But if you've ever seen how those work, it's like having a vase and your tree just sits there and pounds around in it like crazy. Okay, if I'm pounding it around like crazy, that is going to hurt the outer edges of this trunk. And you're going to injure it. If it's injured, can it uptake water? No. So that's why, again, give yourself about 3 inches or 2 or 3 inches that you can cut off as soon as you get home due to, again, the tree shaking injury that may happen, and due to, again, the fact that, some of that water or some of that tissue is going to seal up before you get home, and you want it to be the freshest you can. What we may not realize is the fact that if any of you have ever had fresh flower arrangements, these are actually some of the same steps you would take for a fresh flower arrangement, that you always recut the stems. If you get a bouquet, you should actually always recut those stems because of the exact same principle. Now, they tell you on those that it's even better if you cut it under running water. Good luck to the person who can actually do this with a Christmas tree under running water. That is an awesome feat and just sounds like a big, messy, wet ordeal to me. You probably can't achieve that. But again, getting it into the water as fast as you can should be your goal. So again, those are some of the tips and tricks on those that I wanted to mention. And keep in mind as well, just as we were talking about humidity again for your Christmas tree, even that will benefit if you either keep the humidity higher in your house. And I'm not saying, overkill of what it should be, but just making sure that your heater in your house is not ripping all of the water out of your air and trying to do something like with the pebble tray for the houseplant. That's where even for your Christmas tree, it can be a huge benefit as well. So the other thing that I want to mention, and I will also point out again that if you do have any, questions or things like that along the way, feel free again to, type them into the chat pod, because we'll keep going on this for as long as I have something to talk about, which will at least be another 15 minutes, if not, half an hour, since I've already been going half an hour. But yeah, if you do have any specific questions, feel free to type those in. But the other thing I wanted to mention is going back to our indoor house plants. So some things that are liked to be given as Christmas presents are things like what are called a Christmas cactus or Thanksgiving cactus, as well as poinsettias. So some tips and tricks on those. So keep in mind, both of those plants can naturally flower just by the decreasing amount of sun they receive. Notice what I said. It's by the decreasing amount of sun. Now, we call it the day length is short. Here's the trick. Whenever we talk about day length, we actually really don't care about the day length. We actually care about the night length. What do I mean by that? So right now, I'm just going to throw something out there. We're getting 9 hours of daylight, which means we're getting, about 15 hours of darkness? It is the length of that darkness being that long, uninterrupted, that determines our day length. So if you had like a Christmas cactus or a Thanksgiving cactus that you wanted to bloom, then yeah, right now the natural daylight or night length is what would make it bloom by having it in that sort of a setting. Here's the problem. Do we go to bed after 9 hours of daylight? No, we stay up. Or maybe I have kids and my kids wake me up in the middle of the night so the lights come on. Well, that just interrupted the night. It's not night, now it's day. And that little bit of a trigger of turning on the lights during the night can be what stops the signals in the plant from saying it's time to bloom. So that's why we say it's not the length of the day that matters in day length, it's the length of the night. So if you have one of those that you want to bloom, that's how you actually get it to bloom, is by giving it a long night. Now, options, if you have one and you really want it to bloom and you don't fail want it to bloom, okay, as soon as you get up in the morning, you have it out. But after about that 8 or 9 hour period, put a bag over its head. Like literally get a, paper bag, something that's not going to hurt the plant, or some sort of other cover, and cover the plant until the next morning. You can do that, or shove it in a closet that you won't open until the next morning. And then you do this religiously enough, it will start to bloom. So that is how you can actually get them to bloom better. For poinsettias, that can be why you see some poinsettias bloom earlier in the year, or have the color earlier in the year than others, is because they do what they call pulling a shade cloth, and that helps them actually to bloom faster. Now, because I keep talking about poinsettias, I have to pull out a great fun fact that you can pull at all your holiday gatherings from now on. Do you realize that what we call the poinsettia flower is not a flower? That red is not a flower. It is not. It is actually leaves that are just colored. So it's colorful leaves. That's all it is. It's called a bract when it's like that. Those are basically the most terminal or the most highest leaves that are coloring at that time. I had to laugh because I, being a plant geek, could not restrain myself, because I was in the line the other day with someone, and someone seemed friendly and was talking to me, and there was a poinsettia right there, and somehow we got talking about the poinsettia, even though this was like no more than like a 3-minute conversation. And so I told her this fun fact. I said, that's not the flower. I said, now. And I tipped the plant to her. I said, you see these yellow dots? The yellow parts right in the middle, right there in the middle. She's like, yeah. I said, that's the flower. The red is not the flower. That's the flower. When it's yellow, right there on the inside. I said, you want to know what else is fun? I can tell you which one's a girl flower and which one's a boy flower. There's another fun fact. If you look at them, not all flowers are both girl and boy. Sorry, let's sit together for a moment. Not all flowers have both female and male parts in the same flower. They actually have separate flowers. So you can actually, by looking at it, and it was going to be way too complicated for me to try to show you a great picture of that today because they're so small, but you can look it up that, you can actually see girl flowers and boy flowers in the middle of that poinsettia, and that is the only time that it is truly flowering. Otherwise, it's bracts that are modified leaves that changed color. Our dogwoods that flower in the spring, exactly the same concept. What we consider as petals, usually the white or pink, not petals, they're bracts. Sorry to spoil the fun, maybe. But that's something interesting that if you want to share during your holiday gatherings, that you could share. Another good one that I love and hate is, what is that thing that we like to dangle and say that we're going to kiss under? But mistletoe. Have you ever researched what mistletoe is? Mistletoe is actually a parasitic plant, meaning it grows on other plants and steals nutrition from those plants. Yet we revere it as a symbol of something to kiss under. I find that very interesting. I'm like, is that like a vampire kiss at Christmas? Anyways. But yeah, another fun fact that if you want to have a little bit of fun with something to consider, that, again, like I said, we can talk about, for the plant people, we can talk about how our poinsettia may not be actually flowering. It just might be colorful right now, and how we don't always realize what we are celebrating with mistletoe. Another fun fact is we do love our holly plants. And going back to those holly evergreens, there are some plants that we can cut those evergreens for the hollies off of. And yes, we will have those lovely red berries. Remember how I already talked about the poinsettias and how we have male flowers and we have female flowers? Guess what? We have male hollies and we have female hollies. Now, I love when I want to say something and it's not 100% true, because that's not 100% true, because you will see, oh, this you only ever need to buy this plant because this plant's good enough. That's called grafting. They grafted probably a male branch onto a female plant, and that's how that works. Now, if you cut off that male branch or branches, you probably no longer have the male and female together. But if you ever want to have hollies that you grow with the red berries, you have to keep in mind that you have to get girl plants and boy plants. And sorry, but it's not really easy to gender those plants by looks. You have to know, and they have to be labeled right in order to have that. Because you'll obviously then see the male with, its male form of a flower, and then you'll see a female with the female form of the flower. Why I say that? Because like I've already talked about with poinsettias, the bract is a leaf, it's not a petal. And even that little yellow thing in the middle, it's not going to have a petal. Not all flowers have petals. So you have to kind of know what you're looking for, because even like our oak trees, whenever they drop that nasty brown stuff, yeah, that's part of the flower. It didn't have petals. So keep that in mind on the hollies, that if you're saying, well, I want to get my own cut foliage for hollies, and I want to have those awesome red berries. Well, you need to make sure you get female hollies that will grow the red berries, but you also need a male holly to pollinate your female hollies. And usually there's something like a 1-to-3 or maybe 1-to-8 ratio. You'd have to check to be for sure how to get the best distribution of it. But you need to make sure you're buying both plants. And that's what also makes it a really big challenge, because if you're wanting a line of them in your landscape, you're going to have to realize that there's going to be, this one's not going to have berries because it's the boy plant. So you either have to get really creative about where you sneak the boy one in. Otherwise you may get a gap of no berries on this one, or put it like maybe behind, so on like each side of the sidewalk, put one on one side, one on the other, to hide the male that is barren versus the female full of berries. So keep that in mind as well. So kind of to wrap up a little bit about these evergreen plants that we've been talking about. So again, tips and tricks. They are still living tissue. All your holiday evergreens that you might get in tissues, whether it is just like, I see those lovely pots that the cities and towns will put in where they just stick those branches. Well, I'm saying stick. They beautifully decorate those pots with branches stuck in. Keep in mind, that's still living tissue. And so it's not going to hurt to water that occasionally. Now, granted, if they're outdoors and it's snowing, throw some snow on them. Just make sure there's some snow, which can also make it look really pretty. But make sure they've got that moisture going, and that will help to keep them going well, especially inside as well. Keep that moisture around them, both in the humidity side as well as, again, make sure they are sitting in water if you want them to last the longest. Now, one other thing to keep in mind is that some people like to get the either, I'm going to buy a lovely little arborvitae or a lovely little Christmas tree, and I'm going to have it outside in a pot, and I'm going to decorate it, and then I'm going to transplant it next year. Keep in mind that the ground freezes, and the ground freezes. It doesn't get much colder than freezing because it's frozen. Okay? Anything above the ground gets as cold as the air temp. So if the air temp is negative 40 and the ground is at 32, the ground is technically warmer than the air. Why do I point this out? If my pot is above the ground, then it is likely that it is going to get colder than that 32. Roots can only tolerate so cold of temperature. So being in a pot above the ground could kill it. It's not a guarantee, but it could. So be aware of that you cannot guarantee if you have that tree that it is going to last, that you can plant it outside next year. If you say, I'm going to go buy a lovely potted pine tree that, I'm going to decorate it inside, and when we're done with it, we're going to put it outside and plant it outside. There's such a thing called a shock. And, we experienced this just like if you heard early on, we were having fun, that we were being shocked by how cold, like the table I'm at was very cold at first. And so it was shocking to me to be that cold. I can take my hand off that and I can move. I can, curl up for warmth and warm myself up. If you say, Christmas is done, go outside, tree where you belong, that's a pretty harsh shock. You have to ease the tree to being back outside. So if you plan to have a live potted indoor tree, you have to realize that when Christmas is done, your care is going to continue for a while. Because if you have a unheated garage, you can kind of ease it that way and start lowering the temps and get it used to being unheated, but it's not going to be used to it. And if you do it too fast, you could shock and kill it. So then we can ease it into the unheated garage, but we also then have to ease it out of the unheated garage too, which means, a few hours out there, a few hours back in, a few hours, back and forth. Okay, it's living, so it needs water. While it's in the house, yeah, you'll pass it. You should hopefully remember to water it. As soon as it goes in that garage, are you going to remember to water it? You're going to have to, or it's still going to not do well. You may say, well, I don't have to water my plants outside during the winter all the time. Well, but there's snow on them. And granted, you could do that. You can go get handfuls of snow and throw it on there. But you've got to water it in that unheated garage, or you're going to have a problem. Now, the last thing to consider is when you're in the house, okay, I've got lights on. Maybe I have it near a window too, but I've got lights on. As soon as you go in that unheated garage, are there windows? Are the windows clean? Meaning, are they even going to let any light in? How much light's it getting? You may have to put a grow light on it to get it to be used to having it. It also may get used to this much amount of light, a lot of lights, day length, inside the house. So as you move it outside of the garage, it may get less, which it needs to get less because the winter has less. But that could cause a shock and that could cause a needle drop. And remember we talked earlier about this whole needle drop concept that, hey, it might drop needles, and that does not necessarily mean water it more. That just means it's going to drop needles because the light amount changed. And then hopefully by the time you get it outside, it'll be used to it. This is not a process. It'll take a week, maybe a week per, but it's probably going to take more like a month to ease it in and out so that it's not getting too hot and cold, because it may be you can only have it like out in the unheated garage during the day. And then you have to bring it back in at night because it's going to get too cold at night. So again, this is going to take a while to ease it out there because of all the factors that you have involved. Almost would be easier to keep it in the house the whole time. But again, that creates, okay, what are you going to do with it the whole time? So keep that in mind when you are thinking about, can I grow this and keep it going? Maybe, but you got to be very careful with it too on easing it in and out of these sorts of situations. And again, because like I said, now, okay, if you finally, yes, it's still alive as far as I know, because it takes forever for them to show that they're dead. Because again, I'll go back to the cut Christmas tree example. How long are they essentially dead but green? About a month. So if you do get it all the way outside, what did I talk about? But, oh yeah, that pot is above the ground. So that pot could get too cold above the ground. So then you either have to sink the pot in the ground and still cover that pot so that the roots don't get too cold, or you may have to put the pot on the ground and pile it up with a whole bunch of mulch to kind of connect it to the ground so that it doesn't still get too cold. So again, you're kind of hopefully seeing this is not an easy process. Not that I want to discourage you from it, because it can be a great investment. I think it would be a nice family tradition to set that, we go buy a live Christmas tree and then plant it outside, and as a family, watch it grow. That can be a great tradition. But just like how they say, I see already the ads, pets, like for dogs and cats, pets are not a present. They're for life. Well, so is this tree. It is alive. It is a living thing. And so if that's a tradition you're wanting to set, what's the worst thing you can do but kill the tree? By accident, but kill the tree. So just know what you're getting into and realize that smaller is probably better. So only getting a tree maybe a foot, 2 foot tall that you could probably hopefully manage in the house until it warms up in the spring that you can then move it outside. So get something that is manageable, not something large and unmanageable would be the best option that you would have. So again, just something to consider and think about, because it could become an awesome tradition that you could, have for years to come, and then enjoyment for years to come is to have something like that happen. Keep in mind as well, we talked about the pot in the pot. So if it's a potted tree, pot in a pot or something to collect water so that you can water all the way through. I loved it that I walked into somebody's office once and they're like, yeah, I have this. And I'm like, when's the last time you watered it? Well, I watered it, just a little bit every day. And I'm like, oh gosh, this is going to be bad. I said, go to a sink. I said, put the pot in the sink and just run the water for a little bit through it. I said, what comes out is going to be probably nasty smelling, and it's going to be brown to black, and it's going to be nasty smelling, possibly. And that's because that stuff built up in it. So that's why you need to flush it. So a pot will be easy to do that. And you might say, but I found a balled and burlap one that I like. How are you going to water it? How are you going to maintain that in your house? So this would be an example that a potted plant would probably work better for you than a balled and burlap tree. And other times, I'd say, yeah, go for the balled and burlap, or even bare roots sometimes are awesome trees to start with. But again, you need to make sure you're accommodating for what's going to happen. And again, how are you going to have that plant watered this whole time and managed? And can you manhandle it enough to, transport it from in the house and garage and blah, 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 as much as you need to in order to be safe for that tree? So again, something just to consider in that respect. So I will point out again, if you did have, I think I've covered a lot, but if you do have any questions or comments, feel free to put those in the chat. I just see somebody was appreciative, and I appreciate that, of the Christmas tree, I'm assuming, information. But again, if you have anything else, let me know. But kind of going back again to the potted plants, like I said, the general recommendation I have again is, remember, they are going dormant at this time of the year. So really watch that watering. And what I didn't emphasize before is, okay, they're going dormant. Other times we've talked about it. I've talked about fertilizer being like sugar and just ramping them up to grow. So if I told you they're kind of in a low dormancy period, should we fertilize them? Yeah, not the best time to fertilize them. For one, you may rinse it out as the, winter progresses. But for another, again, they're just not ready for that yet. When we start thinking about bringing them in too, we might have thought or may think, good time to repot them. Not necessarily, again, because they're trying to be dormant. The repotting time is probably better in the spring. So you can maybe take a look at them and say, do I need to consider this? Maybe take a look at your plant and say, okay, can I tell if it's root bound? Because you saw when I lifted that aloe up, it had roots that were actually dangling out of the bottom, which would tend to indicate that it probably is a little pot bound. So I might need to actually pot that up in a future time. But again, during the wintertime may not be the best time because it's in a dormant period, and so that might stress it. But this can be a great time of the year for you to watch and check for that sort of a thing, so that way you can say, okay, I need a new pot, I'm going to need soil, and I'm going to need a new cover pot, the decorative pot, or whatever you're going to do in the future. So it gives you this whole time during the wintertime to basically start, okay, where am I going to get the soil or potting mix? Okay, I know where I'm going to get the best source for that, but what pot or pots am I going to use? So that's where, you can take the whole winter time to basically research that and kind of, get it figured out so that way you are ready to go first thing in the spring, so that you can basically repot it, whenever you want to. I say, is for my plants, kick their butts outside. I like kicking my plants outside during the summertime. They put on a lot more growth and usually look a lot healthier that time than, again, I mentioned mine are the figs that like to drop their leaves. So I love watching them put on a bunch of leaves. Yay! And then in the fall, you just messed up my whole house because you dropped all those leaves again. But I put up with them. They're my babies. I grafted them from like this big, and now they're both about as tall as I am. So it works. So again, like I said, just be aware of that this is not the time to necessarily make changes on them. That's other times. Be aware as well. So I mentioned potting them up. Your other option is think about a bonsai. What's a bonsai? A bonsai is just a tree that is highly restricted to the area it's in. So how they make a bonsai is they basically take a plant and kind of pare it down both above and below ground. They'll actually cut roots. They'll unpot it and cut roots off to basically restrict the growth. That is your other option. You can actually take your indoor plants, and I've done this because I'm like, well, my one fig is in as big of a pot as I want to ever handle because I can't handle a bigger pot in my house. It's too crazy already. So I will actually at times take that plant and I will actually basically unpot it. I will bare root it because I will actually take away all of the soil. I might trim out some roots and then I will, basically refill it with soil, repack it down, make sure everything's good, water it a lot, water it well, just to make sure everything is hunky-dory again with it. And by doing that, I am quasi-treating it like a bonsai. So I am restricting its growth so it can't get any bigger. It's not going to get 100% pot bound and wound up too much because I'm watching for those roots and I'm trimming those roots at times. So if you say, well, I can't handle it any bigger, well, that's fine. Trim the roots. So when you go to repot it in the next year or check it, trim the roots. Now, the other thing I will point out is the fact that if you notice that your soil gets too dry over the wintertime as well, and all the water does is hit the top of the soil, go to the sides, go down the sides of the pot and out the bottom, tough love it. So remember how we talked about that decorative pot and how to have a spacer? Well, if necessary, take the spacer out, use your decorative pot or a bucket. Buckets work fine too. And then fill it full of water and strap your plant into it. Basically, you are trying to force water from all sides to go in it. Only do it for about an hour max. Hopefully by that time, most of the pore spaces have refilled with water. If not, you'll have to replace the soil. But that's a good way to handle it. But that's a way, like I said, if it gets too dry to do that. I guess one of the things to note and watch out on your indoor plants that can happen, it kind of depends on your current house practices, but something to watch out for is dust. So I've had times where we've done construction in my house or done something, and I've noticed that my plants are covered in a film of dust, which is also why I like to kick them out during the summertime because they get a shower. How are they going to get a shower in the wintertime? Give them a shower. I have been known, if we were doing construction in my house, so if we were doing anything where drywall could get all around them or something else, I would have actually put my plants, because they're that big, I've actually put my plants in the shower and turned the shower on and rinse them off. It's good for them. They're dusty. It's fine. I don't necessarily soap them up, and I don't want to soap them up because they have a waxy layer in their leaf that I want to stay, but that's what would happen if they were outside. They'd be getting the rain to wash them off. So it might be a good idea to give your plants a shower during the middle of the winter. It just is going to, again, depend upon your house and what's going on. So if you have something where you clean a lot or you kick up a lot of dust, or like I said, have construction dust, give your plants a shower. If they're small enough, you can obviously throw them in your sink and hose them off in your sink too. Good time to make sure you also water them thoroughly so the water goes out the bottom drain holes like we've talked about, but give them a shower. And that way they're all cleaned off. You don't have to worry as much of are they getting enough light or not, because they're being able to maximize the light because, it's kind of like, me putting sunblock on. That dust particle is like me putting sunblock on. But if I only get it like right here, the sunblock, these spots, won't get the light, but everywhere else will. Well, for a plant, that's the reverse. The part that I have sunblock on won't be able to photosynthesize because it's blocked by dust. The rest of it would get the light, And so it's not working at its full capacity. So that's again why, like I said, giving your plants a shower can be a good idea and to kind of watch out for it. Also, just do watch them occasionally because it may take partially through the wintertime that you might notice that somebody came in with them. Maybe spider mites and they're webby, or maybe they start getting sticky. So watch for that to happen. If it's spider mites, give them a shower. Sometimes that will take care of it. Or if it's aphids, give them a shower, every so often, like maybe every day for a little while. And they should hopefully go away. If it's something else, you may have to, like for example, a scale insect is like a tiny little dot that'll sometimes settle and rest on a stem or a leaf. If it's that, then you may have to either try to pick all the ones off that you can find, or you may have to consider some sort of an application to them, whether it is an organic or synthetic type of a product that you either put on them, like an ultrafine oil. You make sure it's rated for indoor use. And you make sure it's not just a dormant oil. So it must be indoor use rated. And you don't necessarily want an dormant oil, you're looking for sometimes what's called a superfine or ultrafine oil that you can use while the plant is actively growing, or you can cause damage. But there may be other products as well, but you do need to watch your house plants for having something like that to come up and cause a problem as well. So do keep that in mind that can come up and be a problem. But hopefully if you've brought them in, and you know how your plant reacts, it shouldn't hopefully be a problem. And if you get a brand new plant, again, hopefully you're not bringing in a problem. I know I always had bad luck that if I had an English ivy, within a month, it would get spider mites. And then I'm like, hey, Ivy, do you like snow? Let's see. Outside. What do you think happened? Well, it died. That's because I didn't like spider mites, and I didn't want to try to take care of the spider mites, and I didn't have an attachment because I never would have one of those for more than a couple months. So I'd always learned what snow is, which was not ever good for the plant. So anyways, that's my tolerance level, and everybody has those. Then I knew I was not going to be able to treat it well and effectively personally, because like I mentioned earlier in this program, my plants maybe get watered once a month unless my kids beg me can they water the plants for me, and I'm like, sure, because I probably haven't watered them in a month, so go ahead, water them for me. So yeah, be careful for that. So I do see that our time is coming to a close. So for those of you who've been here, thank you so much for joining us. Again, this is kind of being put on between both Gabis Arboretum and Purdue Extension with me in Porter County. Thank you all for sticking on, and I do appreciate Gabis for giving me location and assisting with this process as well. And if you do have further questions or comments, feel free to comment here. You can comment here, and then they'll get messages to me through that, or you can either email me directly at Nikky, which is spelled Nikky, at Purdue, like the university, Purdue.edu. So you can either email me or call my office at 219-465-3555 is the best way to otherwise try to get a hold of me. Keep in mind, I will have a winter recess where I may be out of the office and unable to answer calls during a period of time, but I will answer them as soon as I can. Thank you all for joining us today. We really appreciate it, and hopefully this has been a well enough series, which so far it seems to be. Maybe we'll continue this even in 2021. Have a happy holidays for everybody, and thank you for joining us today.